那个手机，谁把这个？不，你充吧，你充电吧。
我等我进 QQ。OK 好了。你不是开直播了吗？
开了，没人里边，一个人也没有。
完了，这都那么晚了，还有谁还会在这看直播呢？
几个读了几个？
读完了。
就把袜子洗了，然后一会儿上床看书。没有人，一个人都没有。哪有人？
啊，
这是我的时间，你不要出镜。
是吗？哎，老妈，你趁现在这个时间，你可以看一看人家那个，你可以去抖音上，看一看那个人家是怎么弄直播那些简介，趁现在还没人的时候，赶紧仿照一下。临阵磨枪，快帮！
把手机放下。你把手机放下。地理，我给你买本生物的那个东西呗。然后你刚才看的那个什么时间管理和那个情绪管理那个，把那个去看时间管理那个东西去，快去。
时间管理，为什么？时间管理算是好的。
我就把那个生物的那个东西再给你买了哈。
控制玩耍时间，让我看一看它是控制几分钟哈。等会儿我也控制一下自己的玩耍时间。
Nobody, there is nobody.
来，儿子。
你吃饭我从来没有追你吧？
You're very confident. A beautiful quality. Was young Alex confident too? I know we've heard about like you grew up in front of the camera with your father and like so was confidence always easy for you, and how is your journey with confidence evolved?
And the answer is no. Absolutely not. It's actually been interesting because the past year I've really started to get into this in therapy with my therapist, and I haven't really I think I've mentioned it a couple of times to the daddy gang, but I don't talk about it a lot because I'm still kind of going through it in therapy. When I was younger, I had a really hard time in school. Not grades wise, I was a solid B. Let's throw it out there. Maybe I tried a little harder. We could have gotten some A's, but I was severely bullied for my looks. I was super, super skinny. People made fun of me, said that like I looked like I had an eating disorder. I had awful acne to the point where like I would beg my parents to like let me stay home from school, and it was so bad. And I turned inward a lot. Like I never wanted my parents to know that I was going through it because I was ashamed. It's embarrassing to not be able to connect with your peers, and also I was physically bullied. Like the boys would be like, let's play a game. Her legs are so tiny. Like if we trip her, they will snap in half. And like, it was awful. And I never really talked about it, but what got me through it actually was my dad works in sports and he's a producer. And I remember at like 7 years old, he handed me a camera and was like, go make something. And so my escape from I hated everything about myself. I hated my skin, my face, my hair, my teeth, my body, my torso, my legs. Like I could pinpoint every single thing about myself that I hated, and it was almost everything exterior wise. But inside, I knew I was a good person. I knew I was a good daughter. I knew I was a good friend, but I felt like it was all based on looks of why I was getting bullied. So I turned to creating content. That's what was my escape. And I would go in my basement and I would make music videos, or I would write scripts and make like little short films or silent films, and I would put on wigs and put on outfits and makeup. And it was the first time that I truly felt safe. Like I could be fully myself. Meanwhile, I was fully alone. So I'm like a weirdo in my basement. But it was that and soccer specifically. I played extremely competitive soccer, and I realized why I felt so safe also and seen in soccer, because it was all women. Can you score a goal? Like, what are you doing? So what are you bringing to the team, So I don't talk about that a lot because it was actually interesting. I recently was interviewed by the New York Times, and I don't do a lot of interviews.
I read that.
And it was in a follow-up conversation. We had like an hour and a half interview. The reporter asked to do a follow-up, and somehow we got on the topic of my childhood. And I started talking, and I shared with him that I had been bullied. And quite literally, physically, his demeanor, his face, like his jaw dropped, and I could tell he was shocked. And everything that hour and a half interview I first did with him kind of was shattered because he was like, wait, what? Like, you were bullied? And I realized something in that moment was like, the character I've created on Call Her Daddy, there's this dichotomy of, for me, the girl that was bullied, and then the girl I've created or the woman I've created in the show. But I think a lot of people have a hard time. Everyone wants to put things in boxes, understanding like there's no way Alex Cooper, the confident Color Daddy girl, could have also been bullied when she was younger. And what I've come to realize in therapy is actually that ugly, awkward, acne girl is who started Call Her Daddy. Because if I had not gone through that, there's no way I would have started Call Her Daddy. I remember reading Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, and it was like, you've got to have 10,000 hours to even be considered an expert. By 8th grade, I was considered an expert in editing. I was like obsessed with creating content. And so that's kind of a little bit of my story where I definitely struggle sometimes to open up about it because I'm also aware on the internet, sometimes people are like, you're lying, that's not true. And it's I think it's hard for me because it's still so raw. Like I still haven't even fully gone there in therapy that I don't talk about it a lot because I don't want to be dismissed or questioned over something that is so personal and still really hard for me to talk about, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for trusting us and me and being vulnerable, but also talking about the complexity of vulnerability. I think we live at a time when if someone is vulnerable, that everyone's response will be like, or A, people think that's why someone's doing it. B, if they don't think that and they think you're just being vulnerable, sometimes it's complex to say, well, maybe it wasn't that hard as someone's making it out. And then there's a third where it's like, well, can we just listen to someone's experience and recognize that I think if all of us reflect, like I just realized we have so much in common, which I had no idea. And if you looked at it from the outside, I don't think people would think we have much in common at all, which is partly why I love conversations like this, because I'm like, these are the conversations that bring me to life. So I was bullied for being overweight growing up. I was obese growing up, and so was my wife, actually. And so separately, we didn't know each other at the time, but we were both bullied for being overweight. I was bullied for being Indian because there weren't many Indian kids in my school. And so the color of my skin and all the rest of it, I was bullied for that. And I wasn't the coolest kid in school. I was a straight A student, so I was the opposite. And it was like, and it was considered dorky to be smart, especially where I grew up. And so I dealt with all of that too. And so when I'm hearing you say that, I was beaten up at school regularly. My mom used to come defend me in school. Like that was really embarrassing. And even now when people are like, no way. And I'm like, no, that was my entire childhood. And for me, I turned to listening to Eminem and writing music. So I did a lot of spoken word. I used to produce music. It's why I love word and language and just the artistry of what you can do with words. And then when you said you played soccer, which I know, but I'm like, that is my first love. Like if I could be anything in the world, it would be a professional soccer player, like beyond everything.
That is crazy to hear because I agree with you. And that is why I love podcasting and why I love your show, my show, is like you really have no idea what one you can connect with someone on, empathize with someone on, or just like learn about them. And I feel like we've gotten to a point where we want to like discredit and call people out. And it's scary to be open and vulnerable on the internet. And I think like almost my persona, there was parts of me that I had to like try to claw back what I started for Call Her Daddy. Cause I was like, hold on, I need to also like, there's other parts to me other than the salacious, wild, crazy. And it was a great transition for me, which I know we'll get to, but the bullying thing, when you're that young and truly all that matters is peer acceptance. And you feel so alone, you hate yourself. And I realized recently, like, I know my persona is one thing, and that's why I always struggle with this. I'm like, oh, I gotta like ease my listeners into like me talking about this because it's a complete different side of myself. But we all have that, right? We all have those things. Like I remember the first time I shared this with my mother was when I was 21 years old in a cab that I had been bullied, and I told her, Mom, in high school, I used to put on 3 pairs of leggings, tape it to my leg, and then put on my school pants just to hope that everyone would think my legs were bigger.
Wow.
And by the time I would have soccer practice after school, my joints were in so much pain from sitting in class. And I told my mom this quite literally as we're pulling up to Penn Station. She was getting out, and I was going to keep going. I told her this as she's getting out of the cab, and she's like, Alex, like what? And it was my defense